So on the next slide, we're getting to what Scott has been setting up for us, this idea of epiphany. And this is when we get to a place where we've done all of the incremental change, we've put in the work, we've done the transformation, and we still get stuck, or we get stuck again. The image is just a version of Robert Kegan's adult development theory. So the first one is one that anyone with a teenager at home will recognize. So the socialized mind, where we're basically learning how to live in a society. So we follow the rules of society, and your identity and your worth is determined by your peers and by what society, the feedback society is giving you. And lots of the kind of incremental transformational work that we try and do as practitioners is to help us get to this self-authoring mind, the next stage of personal development, where we feel like we are creating our own identity. We are the authors of our own lives, right? We make choices. We create the givenness of our life, is how I think about it. But to try and get to this next stage of personal development, so for Kegan, this is the interconnected mind, is quite hard. So you reach a stage where you have consciously, carefully, thoughtfully, incrementally created the givenness of your situation, the who you are, how you are, your patterns, your thoughts, your feelings, but trying to get to this next stage of being able to see beyond that, being able to see stories that you haven't created or couldn't even imagine, holding many identities, being comfortable with paradox. This is kind of the question that is fundamental to the master practitioner course, and what do we do when we get stuck in a certain level of personal development? And our answer to how you escape the givenness of your situation is the idea of epiphany. And an epiphany is just this moment of insight, this aha moment. And according to science, it's not quite as instantaneous as it seems. So it's a sudden and conscious change of the world, a situation, a stimulus, an event, a problem, but it doesn't come from nowhere. So in fact, it's the result of our unconscious mind piecing together lots of loosely connected bits of information that we picked up through our lifetime from prior knowledge, from experience. And this moment of insight, the epiphany, is your subconscious mind forming novel associations amongst these pieces of information and presenting it to your conscious mind as an aha moment. And these are really useful for personal growth because they allow you to step away from this givenness of your social and psychological arrangements that you worked so hard to achieve in the previous stages of development. And you can see why these are quite difficult to achieve from the lens of neuroplasticity, right? Because neuroplasticity is all about incremental change and following the patterns that you already have and strengthening those. And it's not really about forming completely novel thoughts between them. So what can we do to encourage epiphany? What can we do to try and get this tipping point, this moment of insight, the aha feeling? So on the next slide, we'll see our best guess, our attempt. So if you can give me the text, Sebastian. So at the Neurochange Institute, the fundamental question is, how do you get this kind of tipping point personal growth? How do you get to this epiphany? And what we've done is, sorry, can we go back to the previous slide? What we've done is to look at different theories of personal development, so like Keegan's that we saw before, and we were focusing particularly on the highest level of personal development. And there are lots of similarities between everyone's theory about the highest level of personal development. So we used that as a starting point and kind of abstracted the qualities used to describe that level. And so then we got a set of personality descriptions. And then we went back to the research and tried to identify the experiences that people have that can lead to these highest levels. And that is by definition what we've called a transcendent experience. So it's not super mystical and magical. It is based on theories of personal development and these kind of aha moments that bridge the gap between different levels. So once we have this framework of transcendent experiences, it's important that we capture what they feel like. So to capture the phenomenology of a transcendent experience, we've looked to the science of peak experience and insight. So those have much more scientific backing than transcendence has as a concept. And we get this feeling of transcendence when we have a peak experience and it changes us for the better. Okay, I see people are confused in the chat. Let me try. I'll start with an example and then we'll go from there. So for me, it's running. So running is what I do for fun. It's my hobby. When I go to the track on Wednesday nights and I do my 400-meter intervals, that is not a transcendent experience, right? That is me trying to get better at what I'm doing by implementing incremental change. So I have a clear idea of what deliberate practice is. I know what the outcome of each session is. And that is neuroplasticity, but in a physical space, I'm changing my body and my brain bit by bit. Yes? Then the last transcendent experience I had happened during a 50-mile ultramarathon. So the activity is the same, it's running, but my expectation of that event and my perception of that event completely different to my Wednesday night interval training, right? I can't really explain to you why or what was happening, but I guess it's like this peak thing that you're busy training for. You get lots of environmental input, you're in nature, you're moving, your body is doing a whole many different things, you're tired, you're with people, like it's this event, this experience, and you have this peak experience. You lose track of time, all of the kind of flow state in the zone research applies here. You lose track of like your sense of self, everything feels effortless, you lose track of time, those kinds of feelings. But what makes this transcendent rather than just a peak experience is that it's definitely a before and after moment. Who I was before that event is different to who I am afterwards. It's different. I see myself differently. I see my place in the world differently. Everything about me just had the sudden shift, right? So that's the experience that we're trying to encapsulate, right? And I'm trying to explain the process that we went through to see what the research has to say about this experience and how we can describe this experience as accurately as possible. So what we've come up with is the definition of transcendence is just peak experience plus insight. So peak experience is not enough for transcendence. You need this added like, I'm different, I've grown, I'm moved to a different sphere of personal development, right? This is insight, and that insight needs to be domain general and lasting. So it can't just be, oh, I became a better runner And it can't just be, oh, I felt different about myself for 5 minutes, but now I'm back to where I was. So these are the types of feelings that we're getting to. And as you can see, it's quite difficult to put into words. And the research is very nascent. So we don't yet have a kind of coherent consensus on what all of this would mean. But on the next slide, you can see that there are some interesting strides being made on the neurobiology of transcendence. So interesting studies, fMRI studies being done on people while they're meditating, being done on people at the end of endurance exercise activities, like before the runner's high fades. And I'm sure, as you all know, really interesting studies being done on like the therapeutic value of psychoactive drugs. So those are the kinds of studies and research spheres that we're drawing this neurobiology from. And our master practitioner course includes the current best guesses from science. As I said, there's no real consensus, but very interesting theories coming out here that will be updated as we know more. Next slide, please. So if that's the big picture, what does that mean for a practitioner with your client in a session? So the research shows that there's not one experience that's linked to transcendence. So you don't have to run a 50-mile ultramarathon to get to transcendence. Instead, it's about your expectations and your perceptions of an experience that can make it transcendent, that can bring these aha moments. I think it's very ambitious to try and get the same experience, the same before and after experience of transcendence into a single session with your client. But there are definitely ways that we can create a more fertile ground for transcendent experiences. So we can approach sessions with this intention to provide nourishment for transcendent experiences. And remember, the reason why we care about transcendent experience for our clients is because we want to be able to offer them this aha moment if they're feeling stuck. So, based on our definition of transcendence, right, it was a peak experience, so the flow states and the in the zone states, and it was the insight, the domain general and lasting insights about your life. So when you're thinking about creating a more nourishing space for transcendence, you can ask yourself, can you create an experience that gives your client a peak moment? And can you create a shift in perspective that is domain general and lasting? So the next slides are my two best guesses as it stands. So there's been a lot of research about the type of activities that can lead to peak experiences and transcendent experiences, and I will read you the list. So common transcendence triggers include listening to or playing music, social activities, altruistic activities, athletic endeavors, making or viewing art, academic, political, and intellectual stimulation, being in and experiencing nature, sexual love, death or other life crisis, spiritual or religious experiences, and psychoactive drug use. So if those are kind of common triggers, you can see why the kind of recent move towards walking therapy might be a way of introducing a little bit of transcendence to your sessions, because you've got three potential transcendence triggers there. You have a physical activity surrounded by nature, and you've got this intellectual and therapeutic input together. And then similarly, you can do making or consuming music and art in the same way as a trigger for a peak experience and this moment of insight. So, time for the next breakout room. Next slide. And in this session, it is just asking you to brainstorm a little bit about what transcendence would look like in a session with your clients. So on the next slide, you can see the description. Yes. No. Is it out? So, sorry, the slide is missing. So let me just describe what we want to happen in the breakout session. We're looking for an activity that you can include in a session with your clients that can help them either have a peak experience or help them to get to a moment of insight, similarly to the examples of walking therapy or kind of music and art therapy. And yeah, and maybe just see how it goes, see what your team comes up with. Okay, so we'll be in the same groups, so you should know each other a little bit. And then you can see that our next activity is going to be our reflection and Q&A. So again, any kind of interesting thoughts you have about introducing this epiphany into your sessions, the reflection is a great place to do it. But I think we're ready for breakout rooms now.
Well, and I wonder, just before we go, Laura, whether you give us the question again to be reflecting on, just because we don't have the slide. Is that okay? It just gives us another time to hear it, and if that's all right with you. Oh, I think you've gone to mute. I think we just need to unmute. Thank you.
Sorry, let me read the question. Apologies for the missing slide. So, how can you make your sessions more sympathetic to transcendent experience? i.e., how can you make your sessions more sympathetic to moments of peak experience and to moments of sudden insight?
That's a great question. Okay, thank you, Laura. Off into our breakout rooms now, or we might have some time where we can reflect on our own in the main rooms. So 15 minutes, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Opening
Thanks, Laura.
In 3, 2, 1.